Karma, if it's 9, we might as well get started.
Okay, go ahead whenever you're ready then.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to Growing Concerns for July the 4th. We've got a few things to talk about today. I'm going to start off with John Gavloski been getting some concerns about the Bertha Armyworm moths that are out there and just some numbers. And I figured it'd be great if John could give us maybe a bit of a talk on them as well as an update on maybe some of the control measures. Then we're going to go through and look at some disease issues that have shown up lately, and Holly Derksen is going to be on, and she's going to talk a bit about that. And then I'll end it off today with a bit of the crops update and just some of the other things that I've been seeing in the field. So once again, as we're going through, if you have questions, Carmen will be able to pick them off the list and let us know what they are. So I guess as we're going, we're going to start today with John. And Karma, if you want to turn it over to John, then we can get going. Karma, we're having problems hearing John.
John, you're on mute. If you could just unmute yourself.
Is there some way of you taking back control of the webinar and taking them off mute? Or?
I can't get him off of mute. He's got himself muted. I've just sent him a chat message. So John, if you could unmute your phone. John says his phone is unmuted. Try *69, John. We still can't hear you, John. Did
he answer back?
Try unmuting your webinar tab. There's a little green microphone it's either to the left or to the right depending on what side your webinar tab is on. And just try clicking that to see if we can hear you. John, are you there now?
I'm here.
Perfect. We can hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear him now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, okay. We'll get going then. Sorry about that. Okay, so what I'm going to be presenting on is Bertha Armyworm and Midge scouting and management. And what we'll do, minimize this. Here we go. Okay, so start with Bertha armyworm monitoring. And as many are probably aware, we've got a lot of pheromone-beaded traps set up across the province. And these traps are to collect adult Bertha armyworm.
John, if I can just interrupt you, we've lost your screen.
Oh, boy, that's no good. Okay. Other technical difficulties here. Okay, I will minimize.
I'm just going to send you another invite here to the webinar, because I think we've lost you completely off of the webinar.
Oh, that's no good. Okay.
But we can hear you now.
Okay, well, that's halfway there, I guess. Okay, can you see my screen anymore?
I'm just going to get you to click on the button Show My Screen.
Okay.
There we go. We can see your screen now.
Okay, we will get started then. I'm not trying to touch anything here that'll mess this up. Okay, so you can hear me and see me?
Yes.
See my screen? Okay,
Perfect,
awesome.
yeah.
Okay, so just to jump right into the Bertha armyworm monitoring situation, as mentioned, the green bucket-shaped traps are used to collect adults of Bertha armyworm, and from that we try to predict areas of higher risk in the province. So on your left in the screen you can see what the adult Bertha armyworm moth looks like. My only word of caution to people who are doing the monitoring, sometimes you do get other moths in the trap, so when you do get a trap full of moths, have a quick look anyway and just make sure most are Bertha armyworm when you're doing your count. When using these traps, make sure that you are interpreting the data in the right way. And as soon as I get my screen to advance here, I will. Well, here we go. Okay, so when you're interpreting the data, one of the things you got to keep in mind is this is the adult moth that we are monitoring. This is not the larva, the damaging stage. This is merely a forecast map to try to help us pinpoint areas of higher risk. Doing this, there is a bit of uncertainty. We have had situations in the past where fields where we've had the traps have had a lot of moths, but very few larvae, and fields nearby that had traps that had low numbers of moths had lots of larvae. So don't take the trap counts to mean those fields are going to have high numbers of larvae. That's not the way this works. This is a regional monitoring program, and what we're trying to do is predict regionally what we can expect. And usually when we do have a few traps in a region that are getting higher numbers, we usually do get at least some localized problems in that region. But again, these traps can't be used on a field-specific basis. So if you do have a trap in your field and it's showing, say, 1,000 moths over 3 weeks, it doesn't mean that field's going to get hit hard. It's possible, it can. But one year we went to a field that had a couple thousand moths in the trap to do a scouting clinic. We had trouble finding the larvae. That can happen. So again, this is regional scouting. It's meant to get you out looking for larvae. That's all it's meant to do. And please do not use this data to make spray decisions. The data cannot be used in that way. Okay, I had a question yesterday about, is it a decent idea to just tank mix in an insecticide with a sclerotinia spray with the hope of maybe killing the eggs or adults of Bertha armyworm? And the short answer is no, it's not a good idea. And the reason behind that, I know the rationale might be, well, if an insecticide is cheap enough, what does it hurt? And I guess that's what needs to be addressed, is you can actually reduce your yield by spraying an insecticide when it's not needed. So you want to make sure that if you're applying an insecticide, you're targeting something that is going to be reducing your yield at least more than the insects in your field that are increasing your yield. And those insects, well, you've got predators and parasites reducing pests, but you've also got pollinators in flowering canola. And even though canola can yield well without pollinators, pollinators do increase the yield. And this can't be ignored. There's been a few, I guess, pretty interesting recent studies on this. And I've got a range here that I'm showing in this slide, 13 to 46%. That's quite a big range. The study that showed 46% was from Quebec. And they were actually putting some fairly high concentrations of beehives in canola fields, and they did get a 46% increase in yield compared to the controls. Now that's probably an exceptional circumstance. The pollinators in your field probably aren't increasing your yield by 46%. It may be closer to the 13% that was shown in another study that I'm referring to. I've been able to find 3 studies really that do this correlation between pollinators and yield. And 13, 16, and 46 were the percentages that they came out to be. So the pollinators do have an advantage. They are increasing your yield. Even though you will get a decent canola yield without them, you will get more with them. So you don't want to be tank mixing in, especially an insecticide that will have impacts on bees, in with a sclerotinia spray, because right off the hop you've got probably minimum 10% yield reduction, because if you do something that's going to harm the pollinators. So again, unless you're saving yourself at least 10% or possibly a lot more in insect damage, it's just not a good economic idea. So with Bertha armyworm, don't be targeting adults and eggs. Your risk of getting any kill is, we don't know what the odds are of getting good kill. No one's done that research, and for good reasons. No one really recommends it. We can't really say that you're going to get good kill of egg or adult stages anyway, and you could be doing some damage. So what you do want to do is keep an eye on the larvae. And again, areas that have higher trap count, you should be scouting for them. And it can be any field, whether or not you had high trap counts in that field. Most fields in the region should be scouted. You're looking for larvae. Here's the economic thresholds. 10 to 34 larvae per meter square is what we go on. 10 per meter square would assume you're getting $12 per bushel for the canola, and your controlled costs are about $7 per acre. There's actually a table on our MAFRI website if you go into our Bertha armyworm fact sheet, and the table will give you more specific thresholds for different values of canola and different control costs. So you can use that table to figure out what your more specific threshold is. And this is all based on a study done at Ag Canada in Winnipeg, where they found that there was a loss of about 0.058 bushels per acre for every larva that you're finding in that meter square. So you can use that as a guideline to help you with your decision making. Okay, so if you do find that you've exceeded an economic threshold for Bertha armyworm, now right off the hop I should mention that if you are scouting now in the field, you may find egg masses, and you may find the odd egg mass that has hatched and you have very young larvae. You won't be finding the bigger larvae yet. It's more mid-July to late July that that's likely to happen. And in this year, we may have a lot of canola that's actually being swapped before Bertha gets too big. So it'll be later when we start seeing the big larvae. The ideal time to be spraying Bertha armyworm larvae really is just before they start doing pod feeding. The feeding they do on the leaves is really not all that consequential. After flowering's done, the plants can take a lot of leaf feeding, but you don't want them feeding on the pods. So if you do have those economic populations, it's the pod feeding that you need to be avoiding. So maybe I'll end with that for Bertha armyworm, but if you do have specific questions on control, scouting, or anything I've said, please feel free to ask them. I want to touch on wheat midge as well, since we're at that season where wheat midge are emerging. I just checked the growing degree day map today, and it's predicting that we should be anywhere from around 50 to say 75% wheat midge emerged. So we're in that period where they are emerging. Again, it depends on where you are in the province. The degree days are a bit more in the Red River Valley here. We're probably closer to 75% emergence. Further west, it's probably closer to 50%. So they are emerging. Now, a couple things to keep in mind with wheat midge. Wheat midge, when the adults emerge, will start laying heads on wheat as soon as the wheat heads are visible. So, and they will continue laying eggs on wheat as long as the heads are out. But once the wheat produces anthers, the wheat chemically changes, and any eggs laid on wheat that has anthers already present, the larva will not feed on. They are not recognizing it as a host plant anymore. So if the wheat already is flowering, meaning it has anthers, you do not need to be scouting those fields for wheat midge. The wheat is already resistant to midge. I had another question this past week about, is it of any advantage to be, say, tank mixing an insecticide with a fusarium spray for wheat midge? And once again, unless you have economic populations of wheat midge and the staging is right, it's redundant spray, and it can do more harm than good, because we do have a parasite, which I'll cover in a minute, that does help keep wheat midge below economic levels in most years. So it's, again, even if the insecticide is cheap, if you don't need it, it's better off not to tank mix it in. Scouting techniques, I wish there was something easier, but really the most effective technique is to go out there in the evening when the midge females would be flying and basically have a look at the field and see if you can see wheat midge flying around. There's at least 3 or 4 sites in the field. I usually try to crouch down and look over a few plants and basically count the wheat midge that you're seeing per plant in your view on average. If you're having trouble finding wheat midge while you're out doing that, you don't have an issue. If you're seeing wheat midge all over the place, you probably do. The tricky part is when you're kind of right in the, or close to the threshold area, that's when decision making gets tough. Another thing that some people will do is take a pie plate and do some sweeping, put a little bit of cooking oil or something on to make it sticky, and do some sweeping with the pie plate. And what that will do is tell you if you're at any of the extremes, if you've got lots of midge or if you've got very few, but it won't tell you, you can't make a threshold decision based on that technique. So here's wheat midge. One word of caution, the insect on your left in the screen is a loxanid fly. Most fields will have them. They're decomposers. They're in, you'll see them in canola, wheat, sunflowers, you name it. They're in most crops. They're of no economic consequence. In fact, if anything, they're beneficial because they're decomposer. So don't be counting the loxanids. That will skew your count. And as mentioned, we do have this parasitic wasp, Macrogleans penetrans. Small black wasp. If you're looking for midge and you're seeing lots of these, that's a good thing. Studies in Saskatchewan found that in many years, about 40% of the wheat midge population contains this parasite. So they can certainly keep your population below economic levels. And in fact, they had some years where they were finding 60-70% of the midge with the parasite in their studies. So don't underestimate what they can do. And again, this is one reason to spray if you've got economic wheat midge populations, but if not, let the things that are keeping them low do the job. If you are spraying for wheat midge, one thing to consider is the product that you're going to use and the pre-harvest. Keep in mind that chlorpyrifos, which is the preferred product for wheat midge, has a 60-day pre-harvest interval. So if you were spraying today, July 4th, you've got 60 days until that wheat can be swathed. Swathed. The swathing is where the pre-harvest interval goes to, so it's when the crop is cut. So that means that you're almost into September before you can swath the crop if you use chlorpyrifos. Saigon and Lagon have a 21-day pre-harvest, so it's a bit easier in that regard. Although with the Saigon Lagon, you're targeting the adults, so you might get a little bit of larval kill if they're not tucked under the glooms yet. You won't get egg kill with the Saigon Lagon. And spray, this can't be emphasized enough, spray in the evening or early morning if you can. Wheat midge is very low in the canopy during the day. They come up at night to lay their eggs. They're more active in the evening, so evening spraying is probably your best if you're trying to get good contact and kill. So maybe what I'll do is end with that, and I can take any questions either now or at the end if people have them.
I don't have any questions for you at the moment, John.
Okay.
Before we switch over to Holly, John, I got a question for you. For scouting for Bertha Armyworm, you had mentioned that we probably middle of July was when they would probably be, kind of the time to start. Should you be going in several places out in the field, or how should you do that?
Yeah, and again, you can start any time, but my speculation is right now you would find egg masses and maybe some that are just hatching. It's still good to keep an eye on that. But what people really scout for to make the threshold decisions is the older larva, which you will find on the ground and on the stubble. I guess to answer your first question, probably 3 to 4 places in the field minimum is good, just to get a good representation of what the populations are like throughout the field. And at each station, the way I like to do it is I've got this quarter-meter square that I've made up. It's 3-sided. I put that on the ground. Give the plants a good shake in the area in case there's any larvae on the plants, and then just start looking at what's on the ground in the area you've measured out. So in my case, I'm using a quarter-meter square, and I would count everything in that quarter-meter square and multiply by 4, and that's my meter square count on average. And I would take that and do that in 3 or 4 areas of the field. And once again, if you're having trouble finding them, that's good. It means you probably don't have an issue. Where it's economical is every time you do that. If I can be finding at least 5 or 6 in my quarter-meter square every time I go out and do that, then I've got a field that might be of economical concern. If it happens that once or twice you find a few in your area you've marked out, again, don't get too panicky. Do it in a few areas and see on average what you're getting. If you find that one of your counts was high, but the next 3 or 4 you only found 1 or you had trouble finding them, that might not be that big of a deal.
John, I do have some questions now for you.
Okay.
What crop stage should we scout wheat at?
For wheat midge, as soon as you can see the heads, wheat midge can lay eggs on them. So even if it's just the head starting to poke out of the boot, that's when you should start. And keep scouting until you see anthers. Once you see the little yellow anthers poking out of the heads, what's happening is the wheat is changing chemically at that point, is producing some of these phenolic acids that make the wheat unpalatable to the midge. So you've got this narrow window between when the head starts poking out until anther formation. And that's when the wheat is susceptible. If your field has already flowered, which a lot of fields around here have, in the Carmen area, we've got a lot of fields that have anthers already. Those are already resistant to midge. There's scout if you want, but there's really no reason to be out scouting for midge anymore because your crop's resistant to it. Again, it would be redundant spraying because the midge can't do any damage at that point anyway.
Is there any forecasting done for midge in Manitoba?
There is degree day forecasting where we try to predict when they're emerging, and there's maps currently posted on the WeatherBug site, and I'll be putting that link in this week's insect and disease update. We don't have larval counts. I know Saskatchewan does their larval survey in the fall. We've tried to get funding for that in the past and haven't, so we don't do the larva surveys. We do have Grain Commission maps showing where wheat midge was an issue the previous year, and they base it on downgrading. And last year wasn't a terribly bad year in Manitoba. There was a little bit of downgrading, more so in the western part of the province, but overall we weren't as bad as Saskatchewan was.
So for wheat midge identification, do they have longer wings than a body compared to the other insect you were showing on the previous slide?
Yeah, maybe what we should do, if we can, is go back a slide or two, and if I can get back to that wheat midge slide. Here we go. So the one big difference between Loxana and midge is Loxana is a much plumper insect, very plump body. Wheat midge I described as mosquito-like but smaller. They look like a mosquito shape-wise, but they're about half the size. So it's like a really tiny mosquito that's bright orange. That's the best way to describe them. They do have very long, kind of long, gangly legs. Wings, you know, just looking at the wings, Loxana and midge are similar, but the body shape and color is quite different, and that's one of the best ways to tell them apart.
I think that's all the questions we have for right now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll continue on with the webinar then, and we'll, I guess, go to Holly Derksen, and Holly's going to talk a little bit about some of the disease issues that are out there right now. I'm not sure, I think, Holly, you don't have a presentation, right?
No, I don't, sorry.
Okay. Karma, if you could give the screen back to me, I got a couple pictures. So you can go ahead anytime, Holly.
Okay, thanks Lionel for asking me to speak today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about rust in Manitoba. So we've had a couple of reports come in now about rust in Manitoba. I think in the last week I've had a few more. Previous to that, we weren't seeing it, but there were reports in North Dakota and Minnesota. And in North Dakota and Minnesota, it was primarily stripe rust, but in Manitoba, we've seen leaf rust, which is what Lionel is showing there, and we've seen stripe rust. So it's something that growers should be scouting for, and I basically can only give updates on what I hear from growers. So I haven't had any reports except for a couple from Lionel now in the last week, and other than that, I've seen it in stripe rust in Brandon in spring wheat, and at our plots in Carmen, I have seen leaf rust and stripe rust on winter wheat. The incidence I saw in Brandon was just one leaf showing some stripe rust symptoms, so it definitely wasn't at an economic threshold to spray for it. It was still just at trace levels. But the stuff I saw in my winter wheat was definitely a much higher incidence, and there was some lots of symptoms showing up on lower leaves, however. So the flag leaves still looked fine, but on lower leaves there are lots of symptoms. That being said, my winter wheat's already ripening, so it would be economic to spray the winter wheat as well. Just a couple of points on the differences between the wheats, between the rusts, sorry. Stripe rust, as the name implies, the pustules will form stripes. They always run parallel with the veins. And it's also sometimes referred to as yellow rust. So it's lighter color than leaf rust. However, if you don't have the two to compare between, it's sometimes hard to tell. Leaf rust, it's more of your traditional rust color, and the pustules are kind of individual pustules. However, if it becomes severe, the pustules can coalesce and kind of join together. So sometimes it can be hard to distinguish between leaf rust and stripe rust. However, your control strategies are the same for the two diseases, so it doesn't really matter as long as you know that it's rust. The other rust is stem rust, which we haven't seen any of it in Manitoba this year, and there haven't been many reports of it from the northern United States, so it's not a big concern at this point. So stem rust, as the name implies, can infect the stems. However, it can also infect the leaves. It's a bit darker than even leaf rust, more of a browny color. And what's kind of unique about it, other than the fact that it can infect the stems, is that it kind of breaks through the apodermal layer. So sometimes you'll see a tearing back of that top layer of the leaf as the pustule is being formed. So the number one thing with rust is to protect the flag leaf. So it's kind of a call of whether or not it's at a level where you need to provide that protection with a fungicide. There are different resistance varieties, so definitely think about what variety you're growing and whether your variety will provide some sort of protection. Think about where you're seeing the rust. So if you're only seeing it on lower leaves, but it's at high levels, then you would maybe go in and protect your flag leaf. But if it's only at trace levels in your field, that wouldn't be economic to spray. So it's definitely a matter of monitoring it. However, it's kind of a tricky one, is that sometimes, or always, the infections will occur and then it takes a while for symptoms to show up. So you can go in and spray and then you may still see symptoms on your flag leaves, and what that is that these infections occurred before the spray happened and they were just latent at the time, and then your fungicide isn't able to cure those infections, so you will still see infections. So it's a matter of monitoring what's happening in your own field, but also keeping your ear to the ground and talking to your FPA and local agronomists and listening to what's going on in the area as far as rust reports are concerned. Something they've been seeing in North Dakota and Minnesota, well, for one thing, their crops are a bit farther ahead. So once your crop is past the flowering stage, it's not recommended that you go in and spray at that time. So I know in the Red River Valley, as John was mentioning, we're getting to that point where the spring wheat's already showing anthers. So at this time, if rust is moving in, it wouldn't be economical to spray. However, in other areas of the province, the crops are a little bit further behind. So it's definitely still important to be monitoring for it. Something they've seen in the States is that the the rust is moving forward through its life cycle and it's starting to form black pustules, which is the overwintering stage of the crop. So if you get to a point where you're seeing black pustules, those pustules aren't going to spread to any more cereal crops. That means that it wants to overwinter, so it's looking for its alternate host. So if it gets to that stage, it wouldn't be economical to spray either. Just one more thing about the different types of rust is that they definitely survive in different temperatures. So leaf rust, like mild temperatures, 15 to 25 degrees, it's normally one that we're more worried about as it blows in, because it usually blows in when the temperatures are in that range. Stripe rust likes it a bit cooler. The optimum is 9 to 12 degrees. So normally when it starts to blow in, it isn't a huge issue here in Manitoba. I'm sure you've heard reports from Alberta where they had a problem with it overwintering last year and the year before that. So they've had these early outbreaks of stripe rust because the rust has overwintered and arrived when temperatures were in that optimum range. So they've had very high levels, especially in their winter wheat crops. We haven't had cases yet of it overwintering in Manitoba, and hopefully it's something we can avoid. So as long as we're dependent on the stripe rust blowing in, and when it blows in, if temperatures are warmer than the optimum, we won't have huge outbreaks. Stem rust likes it the hottest, 18 to 30 degrees Celsius, but as I mentioned before, we haven't seen stem rust yet this year. Nothing to worry about, although I'm not sure if we're past this point, is that, even if you're winter wheat, you're seeing a lot of it in your winter wheat, but your winter wheat is past the point of when a spray would be economical. It's definitely important to be monitoring your spring wheat because it can easily spread from the winter wheat to the spring wheat. Rust is one of those diseases that all it needs is green tissue in order to spread. So it's not like a certain timing where, when the wheat is flowering, it infects, like we talk about with fusarium. As long as there's green tissue, rust can infect. So it's really something that should be monitored throughout the year. Another thing I've been getting a lot of questions on is oat crown rust. I'm not sure. We haven't had any reports of oat crown rust yet in Manitoba. I've been in contact with those in North Dakota and Minnesota. There was one report in Minnesota, I believe, last week, and there haven't been any reports yet in North Dakota. So at this point, we don't feel that the pressure is high for oat crown rust in Manitoba. That's all I had on rust. Lionel, did you want me to touch on smuts or?
Yeah. Before you leave rust, though.
Yeah, we do have a question. Can you show a comparison to tan spot if you can? I'm seeing this grow over the last week lots.
A comparison as in what it looks like or as in the conditions?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay.
If we wait till the end, I've got pictures of tan spot that I can bring up at the end.
Sure.
And then we can kind of compare, but
if you want to show my screen, I do have some more pictures of rust that I can show.
Oh, and just to clarify, it is leaf rust versus tan spot.
Okay. So here's a picture that I have of the rust. So on the left we have stem rust, so you can see it breaking through the epidermal layer of the stem. And then on the right we have leaf rust pustules as well as stripe rust pustules. So you can see that there's a distinct difference in the color. However, if you don't have the two to compare between, it's hard to tell. But the stripe rust pustules will always form these parallel lines along the veins of the leaves, whereas the leaf rust pustules will be individual pustules. They should be easy to identify between. The conditions for both of them, tan rust is more of it's not so picky about the environmental conditions, so it can show up pretty much throughout the year. The big difference will be when the leaf rust blows in, and that's when you'll start to see more leaf rust pustules as opposed to tan spots. So the conditions are pretty similar between the two. For both the diseases, like any leaf disease, we talk about protecting the flag leaf as the #1 thing of importance.
And then I guess, Holly, one of the things, Holly, with the rust, you'll notice the breaking in the tissue sort of thing and then what you'll be able to wipe it off on your hands. So that's a pretty good comparison between it and tan spot too, right?
Yeah, especially, I mean, if it's a later infection and it's gotten really dry, it can be hard to wipe up. It definitely looks like raised pustules as opposed to tan spot, which will always be within the leaf.
And one more question for you on rust before you leave it. Last year we had some oats fields in the western side, I guess, of the area here that were sown a little bit later, and basically when the rust came in, just kind of took them right over. Was that the crown rust, or would that have been something different?
That would have been the crown rust, I think, in oats. And then we did have high instances of it last year. I remember seeing it when it came in. There was quite a bit of it as well. Usually planting early is a way to avoid a lot of yield loss from crown rust, but if that's not possible, it's definitely a matter of monitoring it and listening to the updates to see if it's coming to your area. And then there are fungicides that you can spray.
Okay, well, if you want to talk a little bit about the smut as well.
Sure. So Lionel has pointed out that there's been a couple of reports of smut in barley and wheat in the southwestern area of the province. I haven't heard reports or seen them myself. It's not surprising. Every year we have some level of smut. I'm not sure the levels that are being seen up there right now. There's not a whole lot you can do for this season once you see smut. It's a seed infection that remains dormant until the flowering period and when the seed begins to form. A good estimate of your yield loss, if you think about it, the smut is replacing the seed, so the amount of your crop that you see smut in, that's basically the amount of yield loss that you're going to see. The number one thing about this is that you're not going to want to save this seed for replanting, as it can spread to uninfected flowers. So what happens is that the spores from those smutted heads will spread to flowers of neighboring plants, and they will infect that seed. Even though you won't see the symptoms this year, what will happen is you'll plant that seed, and then the symptoms will show up next year. It basically spreads as long as there's humidity and temperatures between 16 and 22 degrees, and it's dispersed by wind and rain. So the number one thing, as I said, you don't want to save the seed, and the other thing about smut is the use of seed treatments. So as there's a seed-borne infection, if there is a chance that you're planting smut-infected seeds, then a seed treatment will protect those seedlings. Generally in Manitoba, the yield loss is less than 1%, although there are cases where we've seen higher levels of smut.
Karma, if you could give my screen back to me, I got a couple pictures yesterday of it as well.
Yep, that's pretty good smut.
And I guess the thing,
Go ahead.
sorry, I guess the thing that when I was in the field with the producer, the heads stand out so much, so they definitely, you know, it looks like it's bad, but really it's there. You know, if you did a square meter count, or you know, and or quarter meter count, and counted all the heads and then counted the ones that were actually infected, the percentage is really fairly low.
It's another one of those ones that's easy to identify. I like those diseases like rust and smut. It's hard to misidentify them.
You bet. Karma, is there any questions for Holly?
No, I don't have any more questions at this time.
Okay, well, what we're going to do now then is we're going to continue on with, I guess, a bit about the crop update for the week here, what kind of some of the other things I've been seeing. And I guess, first of all, with been getting lots of questions regarding disease, and with the fog and the damp conditions every morning, we're kind of in a perfect situation for diseases to be spreading or to be moving through the field. So definitely getting a lot of concerns from producers regarding spraying. I guess one of the things want to mention is that we are getting to the point where we are getting a lot of the crop past the stage of some of the concerns. I agree with John on the wheat midge. A lot of the crop in the southwest here is getting close to being done flowering. So I guess some of the later fields we'll need to keep an eye on, but you know, a lot of the crop is done flowering, and we're in a stage now where even fusarium control is getting to be borderline. So I guess unless producers are looking at leaf disease control, that would be it's getting to be one of our last options. One of the crops, I guess, that is getting into the stage, and I guess that's why producers are starting to, you know, show concerns about the Bertha armyworm as well, is a lot of the canola is getting into that stage where it was getting ready to spray with fungicides. So we did get have been getting quite a few questions this past week, and the other question I'm getting is it is it worth spraying for disease in canola? And I guess the reason I'm getting that question is some of the canola crops are showing the effects of early spring planting, where the seed sat in cold soil for a long period of time and I guess lacked a little bit of germination later on and never really developed well. We're also seeing areas in the field where flea beetles became an issue later on and really reduced the amount of plants in some of those areas, as well as cutworms. So we were seeing a lot of different issues happening out there, and there are several fields out there that are kind of that borderline right now of making the 30 bushel an acre type crop. And I guess it always comes down to what's canola going to be worth when you sell it in the fall. But I guess in the past they've always said if the crop is probably not going to be a 30 bushel canola crop, then the value for spraying is you're probably not going to see a lot of value for spraying. I guess as the value of the crop goes up, maybe it's not quite as true anymore. But if the crop is only going to be a 30 bushel crop, when you get days like yesterday where it's hot and a little bit of a breeze, the canopy isn't overly thick, so it tends to dry out. I know I was in some fields this past week, the ground was cracking in some areas. Some areas were really needing this rain, and in those fields it would have been borderline, whether it be worthwhile spraying or not as well. So it's not just go out and spray every field. I think you should really sit down and do the economics as well. Storm went through last night, right through kind of the southwest region here. We had reports of 3-4 inches between Elgin and Oak Lake area. Reston area is reporting 3 inches. I noticed a lot of the winter wheat this morning was lodged in some of those places. So we're going to have some issues maybe with some of this stuff not coming back up, but we'll see in a couple of days. But definitely had a lot of rain that went through the southwest last night. Next few slides, Scott Day actually sent them to me the other day. We were seeing some issues with authority on sunflowers. They look like they're going to be growing through them, but if you're seeing some issues with your sunflowers where you're getting some abnormal growth, some whitening of the leaves, almost like a bronzing, and it seems like the sunflowers are picking up a bit of the authority from the ground and causing them to just get some abnormal growth as they're growing through them. So, but as they grow through the layer of authority, they tend to, or it looks like they're going to outgrow the problem. So it doesn't look right now that that's going to be quite an issue. I guess the fields where we probably were seeing more of an issue on were probably the ones that last year maybe did some Express or Express Pro, and they were trying to clean up fields and they were spraying Express with glyphosate, and then this year going in and using authority, and maybe we're just getting a buildup of residue in the soil, and maybe that's where some of these issues are starting to show up. And just a couple of slides here. I was in the north of Minneota area, and this is the Assiniboine Valley just before you get into Minneota, and just to show you how much water has actually come up. This was all planted this spring. You could see the canola crop that was down there. It was looking really good, and over the last couple days it's been getting more and more water on it as the Assiniboine floods the bank. I know today when I was coming, Sioux Valley is starting to flood over the banks at Sioux Valley as well. So I guess with that, Karma, if there's no more questions, that'll be the webinar for today.
I do have a question for you. What are your thoughts on variable rate fungicide application on canola?
I guess one of the things for me, it's more the coverage than variable rating it, and I guess if they're thinking where it'll be full coverage where it's heavier and less product where it's thinner. When you do the economics and you figure out what it costs for the product and the application costs, so I'm assuming that you're going to get it custom applied. If you do the numbers this year at $12 or $14 canola, I think it's around the 14 right now. You're probably better off just going with the full rate. And if your plan is to spray the field, because really your saving is not going to be that much when you're, I think if we get back down to canola levels in that, $6 to $10 range or $6 to $8 range, then we're probably in a situation where it might be more of an issue. But now with canola being where it is, if your intention is to spray, I'm thinking instead of worrying about the variable rate, I'm thinking coverage. In my mind, it seems to be still our biggest issue is getting the product down into the plants and getting good coverage. So I think the variable rating of fungicides is maybe still a little ways away, in my opinion, anyways.
Is there a site to go to calculate payback of sclerotinia control? Are there better products to use to get a good bang for the buck?
I'd have to check on our site. I don't know if we still have one or not, but the Canola Council used to have one on their site. So if you go to the Canola Council site, I think they have one. If not, contact your local GO office, and I think we'll be able to supply you with some of those, because they were around. I remember them being around. So if check the Canola Council, and that'll be the site I would go to first. Regarding products for better bang for your buck, seems now with all the companies, it seems to be more of a programming thing as compared to a product thing. I think a lot of the products out there, there's several that are really good, and it comes down to where you fit on programming, whether you're buying several different products from one company, and then it helps you in the economic decision because you're bringing some of those high-end products down to what some of the lower-end products are costing you. So to pick one product out, there's probably, I don't really have one favorite, but there are 2 or 3 there that are the high-end products that are doing fairly well.
Ingrid just sent a clarification that there is still information on the Canola Council site.
There is? Okay, thank you, Ingrid. Yeah, so if you want to go to the Canola Council site, then that would be where I'd go to do the economic sheet on whether it pays to spray or not.
Ingrid also gave us the comment. Tom Wolf from AAFC says that coverage is always a bigger issue than difference between products.
Good. Yeah, and actually Ingrid sent me an email. She sent it around about a week ago on sprayer tips and spraying, and I've actually forwarded that on to a few producers that have been asking about it. So if you're interested in that kind of information, we've got that at most of the FPAs will have that as well. And I agree with that. Coverage, in my mind, is way more important than trying to pick between 2 of the products.
That's all that I have for questions right now.
Okay. Well, I guess with that, once again, there's my information and Linda's. And then the FBA's in the Southwest and the South Parkland area. And I'd like to thank Karma again for helping putting the webinar together today. And I'd like to thank the people that are asking the questions and adding information. It's always good to get good feedback and good comments as we're going through. And thanks to John and Holly, because it was really short notice. I got a lot of calls on Tuesday or yesterday, and they were really, really good to come and put together some information for us on some of these things that kind of show